listening to the Top Music Guitar Podcast, the show for guitar teachers to learn about the craft of teaching great guitar lessons that students love. If you're looking to start or expand your studio and make guitar teaching your full-time dream job, you've come to the right place. Each week, you'll get to hear from some of the top guitar teachers from around the globe and get their best tips and experiences so you too can build your own dream studio. I'm your host, Michael, and I've founded one of the top guitar schools in Australia, written a best-selling curriculum, and I mentor guitar teachers. I'm excited to share my expertise with you and the wisdom of all the experts we interview. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Top Music Guitar Teaching Podcast. With me, I've got a very, very special guest, someone who comes from the world of classical guitar. You may have noticed a little pattern that we've got a few people from the other end of the guitar playing spectrum to share their wealth of knowledge and, of course, all the amazing things that we're doing. Because we know you guys as the listeners come from the whole gamut of guitar teachers, whether it's rock and contemporary, jazz and classical, of course. And within that spectrum of teachers and genres, there are some 80-20 principle kind of things where there's some teaching stylistical things that are going to be broadly applicable to every area of musical education and guitar teaching. Then there's going to be some niche specific stuff or some things that classical guitar players may reflect upon or teach as a normal everyday kind of thing that us contemporary teachers may be completely unawares of, and vice versa. If we can take some cool contemporary educational ideas and help out some of our classical friends, then we're all going to win together. Now, my guest today is someone who's got a brand new book out, and we just had a little bit of a chat before we hit record. And again, a classical guitar teacher writing a book on chords, often pretty unheard of because it's not something you'd come across in the genre specifically, which is what makes it so interesting because, of course, chords is something that our students are universally struggling with, the way that they're traditionally taught and the way that most people understand them or their lack of understanding thereof is something that's going to be a challenge for guitar students the world over. And of course, us as guitar teachers trying to teach them. So our brand new guest for today is Francesco Barone. Francesco, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So whereabouts in the world are you tuning in from today?
I'm tuning in from the Boston area, Boston, Massachusetts, just outside a city called Medford.
Fantastic. I believe I've got a couple of guitar teacher friends around the Boston area and Medford area, so small world. Now, for the listeners who haven't met you yet or heard of you, give them a brief overview of your journey as a guitar player and your transition into teaching and performing, and of course, into becoming an author.
So I began playing guitar when I was 13 years old. I grew up in Pennsylvania in the Philadelphia area, and I was playing contemporary guitar, rock guitar, picking up classic rock, Jimi Hendrix. I was learning my guitar chords. I was playing Metallica tunes. And then I heard a Bach prelude played on the guitar when I was 17 years old. And from that point forward, I made a complete pivot to classical guitar. From there, it was just a matter of learning how to read and getting my skills up to a point to be able to enter college for guitar. And at that time, I also began teaching. I was teaching a few students privately, and then I picked up a job at a local music store, and that was my first teaching gig. And then I completed my undergraduate in the Philadelphia area, and then I moved to Hartford, Connecticut, to complete my graduate work, my master's and doctorate in classical guitar. And it was there where I took a course on guitar pedagogy and really learned a lot about the sequencing of material. Additionally, during those years, I began my training as a Suzuki teacher. And so I was certified. I'm certified in a number of Suzuki books and learned more about teaching through there. So I guess during that time in 2018, I had been teaching mostly classical, but I always had students who wanted to learn some of their favorite songs. They wanted to learn chords. And what I would do is I would just ask them, hey, send me, 10 of your favorite songs. And then I would sequence them in order of difficulty. And at some point I thought, hey, you know what? I've learned all of this information and this knowledge about sequencing of material, but I don't really see any methodology that applies this to learning chords. And so I felt a sort of calling or duty to write this to help out the music community so that there would be a resource like this. And so that was the genesis of Chord Companion, which is now Guitar Chords and Context. And then I released it initially in 2020, and I re-released it just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. And not often do you hear from a rock guitar player turning on to classical, although I have interviewed a few people on the podcast and in general about it. So it's a very interesting perspective to go the other way on that one there. But I think something that's fascinating, and I did want to dive into before we move a bit further forward, is just how deep you've gone into, the university system and the tuition. So do you want to maybe explain or expand upon some of the benefits of going through the college system and even to the degree that you have?
Sure. Yeah, I think certainly developing one's music skills, their playing skills, and just knowledge about music in general. I think the university system is fantastic. Obviously, not all schools are equal, so it's really important, I think, to choose a strong program for your particular discipline. Whether it's jazz guitar, whether it's rock or other popular styles, or whether it's classical guitar. And I found my, in person, just from an artistic perspective, I found my education very enriching. I'm very grateful to have, been able to study within the, university system for as long as I have.
That's really, really awesome. And you mentioned, sorry, did you say before you had a PhD? You're now a doctor. What was your area of study?
Classical guitar. So all of my degrees are in classical guitar.
Yeah. Fantastic. So we should have introduced Dr. Francesco Barone to the podcast. Now, in terms of Suzuki Method, you mentioned that as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about Suzuki? Because I know a number of our listeners have expressed interest in that.
Sure. So the Suzuki Method is a methodology of teaching music with language acquisition skills. And so just think about the way a child learns a language. So the first thing that they'll do is they'll listen to their parents, and they'll listen to their parents talk, and they'll listen to the people around them talk. And then they'll develop a vocabulary, and they'll probably develop a pretty robust vocabulary before they learn how to read and write. And so the Suzuki Method is designed in very much a similar way. So there's a strong emphasis on listening, where students will listen passively to the CDs. They'll listen to them while they're playing. They'll listen to them while they're going to sleep in bed, while they're having dinner, on car rides with their parents. And so listening is a strong component of this. Another strong component is the parent involvement. So parents are present at the students' lessons, they're taking notes, and then they're the at-home teacher or the at-home practicer. They practice with the children. Another aspect of community is that in addition to the lessons that they're receiving each week, students will also take a group class where the studio meets together, and the students are playing together and they're doing activities together, reinforcing the skills that they're learning. And then also with the Suzuki Method is that, like learning your first language, reading is delayed. So students will first learn by rote. They'll learn by listening to the CD, and they'll learn by listening to the teacher play. And then later, reading is introduced when they already have developed a fair playing skill.
Yeah, and a lot of that sounds like a proper plan of development. We're always contending with our teachers here. No, you've got to read music first. You need to do it this way, that way. But Suzuki seems to, model the natural growth and development of a child. Can Suzuki Method be used with adults as well?
That's a great question. I know teachers who do it. The ones that I know who do it, an adjustment that they make is they will they'll introduce reading sooner. So, just even how an adult learns is much different than how a child learns. Children are much more sensory. They're more reliant on their ears because they haven't developed reading and writing skills in their own language yet. Whereas adults, the older a child gets, the more reliant they become on their vision, and the more they become reliant on reading. And so I think I found for an adult, it's necessary to introduce reading sooner. I personally use a different methodology. I actually use my own methodology for teaching adults, but I do know teachers that will use the Suzuki method for adults as well.
Fantastic. Well, are you at liberty to dive into your own method at adults and tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm actually releasing my second book, which will be my methodology, in a few months. It should be released in January. And the method combines traditional classical guitar method, the Suzuki method, and I would say the Provost method, or my mentor's way of sequencing materials. And the book is divided into 3 parts. So the first section is most similar to the Suzuki method, where students learn by rote. They learn how to shift. They learn how to play rest strokes. They learn how to play about an octave of notes on the first 3 strings. And then at that point, we'll segue into the second section of the book, which is like a traditional guitar method where you're learning how to read. And from there, the students will learn different note values and different rhythms and accidentals and notational things. And they'll learn the entire first position that way. They'll learn free strokes. They'll learn how to play with the thumb. And then in the third section of the method, we start getting into multi-voiced pieces or introductory guitar solos. Everything that's pre-arpeggio. So learning how to play with the thumb and fingers separately, thumb and fingers together, playing with the thumb and fingers alternating, kind of like a boom chick sort of thing, and then playing with plucked chords. And so that's like a high level overview of my methodology.
Awesome. Well, guys, obviously keep your eyes on the horizon. We'll let you know when Francesco's next book's out, because that all sounds really, really interesting. And what do you think separates your approach with teaching adults? I know you mentioned a little bit of Suzuki and things like that, but what actually separates what you're doing and makes it different or special or unique that's lacking from traditional guitar education?
That's a great question. So a lot of it is, I think there's a few things. So part of it is actually the Suzuki influence. So what I found really challenging teaching in a strictly traditional guitar methodology is that in that first lesson, you have to teach the student how to sit and hold the guitar properly. You have to teach them how to set up a proper right hand position. You have to teach them how to play rest strokes. You have to teach them how to set up the left hand. You have to teach them how to read music, and then you have to teach them a song. And so that's a lot of material to cover, especially in a 30-minute lesson. And by taking the reading out of it initially, it really allows to develop the student's technique. More, you can focus on that a little bit more without thinking too much about the reading. And then once their technique is developed, then they can jump into the reading. But I think that would be a difference from traditional methodology, which would get into reading right away. It would be, okay, here's your first 3 notes. You're going to play, song X. Another thing is, I think that it's traditional methods are a little too gradated. So what I notice with them is, for the most part, you're learning how to play single notes for the entire first book. And I think it's too slow, especially with adults. Adults can pick this stuff up a lot quicker. And so my last section gets into introductory guitar solos. I quickly help them develop the skills that they need, reading skills, technique, and then we start to get into solos. So I think there are 2 major differences. Awesome. Another difference. Sorry to cut you off there. Another difference is the material that I use for the second section. So, Suzuki uses a lot of like kind of kiddie and folk songs. These traditional methods are kind of do the same thing. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to use the plural. I do have some of those, but the plurality of the selections are from major classical composers, or they're melodies that are pulled from the standard guitar literature. That
sounds really, really cool. Just to clarify, when you say guitar solos, you don't mean like ripping a shred kind of piece. You mean like as a solo player, you're doing the melody and the bass line at the same time, or as a standalone piece?
That's correct. Yeah. I think it's good that you made that distinction. I think in the contemporary world, in the classical world, a guitar solo, the word is used for 2 different things.
Yeah. So essentially what would be a jazz player would call a chord melody, where you're playing the lead line and the accompaniment bass line and or chords at the same time?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, as you mentioned before, that really lacks from a lot of the beginner guitar methods is you either play the melody or you either play the chords, and it sounds very unfulfilling. It's not wholesome. It's not like when you listen to a piano player who does just a simple bass line with their left hand and the melody with their right hand. It sounds amazing. That's something I think is, really missing from most of those early beginner guitar kind of methods, is the fact that it just sounds like a kid's song, or it sounds like a beginner song as opposed to a new piece. So yeah, I think you're definitely doing great things for your students there and giving them something that will hopefully sound a lot more holistic and a lot more inspiring.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point about the piano methods. Speaking of the sequencing of material and methodology, some pianists can draw their lineage back to Beethoven. So methodology has been crafted over hundreds of years when it comes to the piano. And I did teach a little bit of piano in my past. And I mean, they get into, two-part pieces right away. I don't think you can do that with a guitar that soon. But we should be striving for doing it sooner rather than later, for sure.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a matter of we can't do it. It's just a matter that there's that whole glass ceiling of, we can't do that. You need to play for this amount of time before we go out and explore that, not realizing that often you can start doing some amazing things straight away. And even last night, it's obviously coming up to the end of the year here in Australia in terms of our summer break and that. But I had two brand new students have their first lesson last night on the back of, students who've been learning since January at our new location. And they pretty much got thrown in the deep end to learn this song and were able to play it despite, some of the kids struggled with it last week who've been learning for 8 months. So I think when it comes down to it, if you go, well, how can I make this happen at an easy level? And, for example, use open strings and a scale that goes horizontally along the whole first string. That whole first string, the E string, if you play any E-based scale along with string 6 open, with obviously the open A as well, you've kind of got like a 1-4 pedal. Or if you go the A string and the E string, you've got the 1-5 there. So something for us maybe both to explore or think about, and the listeners to ask themselves, hey, how can I actually get my students playing accompany parts to themselves, maybe in a less structured way than a formal song, but at least get the mechanics of two hands, two different fingers working at the same time and creating their own little harmony.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting idea to explore, for sure.
Now, getting back on track with Suzuki there, in fact, I want to ask you one more question, because you mentioned sequencing and a few things like that. And I'm sitting here going, wow, there's a whole bunch of things I haven't even thought of, or I've never had a conversation with someone. That's why I love doing this podcast, because I always learn some things and leave feeling really inspired, obviously with your wealth of knowledge and all the study that you've done. So what is this idea of sequencing? And as you mentioned, with like the piano's got a very long history, guitar is probably just over 100 years old in the contemporary way we think about guitar. It's really relatively a brand new instrument. So what are some things in the term of the history of guitar playing and the pedagogy and this idea of sequencing? And they may be a couple of different topics. What are these things that we contemporary players could reflect upon and learn from and add to our knowledge?
Sure. I mean, it's a good question. When I talk about sequencing, all that means is, what order am I going to introduce pieces? So I would introduce something with a classical piece. I would introduce something with a single line, a single melody, before I would introduce something that introduces the thumb. That one piece builds upon the other. Suzuki is very good at this. That the method's very gradiated and everything's very well sequenced. They've done a lot of the work for you. In terms of chords, actually, this might be a good place to talk about my chord method a little bit and how I've sequenced it. What I've done is I introduce one finger chords first. So, rather than the traditional way of teaching chords was like, oh yeah, it's just 3 chords, learn E, D, and A. Well, if you think about it, those chords are actually pretty hard to play. I mean, an E, you have to kind of rotate your arm in a little bit, and you're placing 3 fingers on the neck of the guitar. For a beginner player, that's a lot to handle, especially if you're working with a child with a small hand. And even the D, I would say D is a little bit easier, but it's still, you're still placing 3 fingers on the neck of the guitar, the 3-finger chord. And then A, I think is a pretty challenging chord, because you either have to do a 2-finger bar or you have three fingers along one fret, which presents technical challenges. So what I've done with my method is I've introduced chords by how many fingers are required to play them. So the first things that are introduced are one finger chords, which are G, C, and then also open power chords, E, A, and D. And it's really interesting, kind of to your point that you were making earlier, with those 5 chords, you could actually play a fair amount of music with them, and it's really just one finger, and it could be really rewarding. And then from there, I get into 2-finger chords, A minor on the top 3 strings, E minor, and then into 3-finger chords, D, D minor, and then I'll get into more of the open chords. I'll start introducing power chords and getting into shifting up and down the neck, because that is a skill that needs to be developed. And then with bar chords, I think I take a fair amount of time to introduce the bar. I'll start with just a 2-finger bar, F major. Great example. Top 4 strings, you're fretting the top 2 strings. And then F minor is a 3-string bar. So that would be the next thing I introduce. And then I would get into 5-string bars, or 5th string root bar chords and those different forms. And then the same thing with 6-string bars. And so that's the idea that you're sequencing, or you're introducing the material in a way that builds upon itself. So when you've learned the first piece that helps you, or the first chord that helps you develop skills to learn the second, and it alleviates left-hand tension, and also facilitates learning the material in a seamless manner and more quickly. I find that my students are able to get through this method fairly quickly. And that they're learning their chords well.
Yeah, that all sounds amazing. And I think it's just so on par with definitely the way that I teach, and sort of our philosophy here at Top Music is just this idea of how do we make it easy for our students? How do we make it achievable? And just this traditional approach to chords, as you've said, like you're trying to get this complex shape and this complex shape and this complex shape. And it's just well beyond what most beginners are going to be capable of for a couple of weeks. So rather than set them up for failure by giving them something beyond their level, what can we give them right now that they can play straight away with one finger? And at their level of development, especially as kids, what can they coordinate with one finger and start playing straight away? So I'm glad to hear your method is, based on that idea and those philosophies there. Now, in terms of the book, what is your book actually called? Because you've got it, it's just recently come out a couple of weeks, probably it'll be a month old by the time the listeners start hearing this. So why don't you tell us the name of your book and where our listeners can find it?
So my book is titled Guitar Chords in Context, and it is on Amazon. You can find it exclusively on Amazon, and you can find it in an ebook format. You can also find it in paperback.
Fantastic. So guys, we'll obviously post a link wherever you're listening to this podcast, but we highly recommend you check that book out in whatever method is the easiest way to get hold of it for you. Now, you've mentioned the fact that you introduce chords in different levels and start with one finger, then 2 fingers, and build upon that, which is absolutely fantastic. Are there any other things that's specific to this book or unique to the context part of it? Obviously, Guitar Chords in Context, the title, sort of maybe hints at a music theory application, or at least an understanding of chords from that perspective as well.
It's a great question. So in context, the idea was in sequence, that you're learning the chords in a sequence. You're learning them from easiest to most challenging, and you're learning them in a way where you're developing the skills in exercise, or in chords 1, chapter 1 that you're going to need for chapter 2. So that's the idea of context. Another interesting feature of the book is that I include popular songs in each chapter. So chapter 1 introduces G7, G, C on the top 3 strings. I'll use one finger. And even that chapter has a song. A paperback writer has two chords. And, a student who has learned a G7 and a C can play those chords along with the recording.
That's awesome. And I can just imagine how stoked most people are to be able to leave their first lesson playing a song like Paperback Writer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially for learning chords, students really want to be able to play their favorite songs. They want to play songs they know. They don't want to play exercises.
That's it. And that's an important point to reflect upon, the fact that most beginner guitar method books sound like exercises. And that's what I probably discovered in my guitar playing journey. The reason why so many of my students were dropping off was the fact that we were making them learn a book with a whole bunch of really dull pieces, which were just completely uninspiring to play. So in order to capture our students' self-belief and spark that, that inspiration within them, giving them something they like, enjoy, and recognize is really, really important. What are some of the other easy pieces people can play with these simple chords?
That is a good question. I have a lot of Beatles pieces in there. I mean, I think the Beatles have a very unique harmonic language, and particularly for the later parts of the book, I selected some different selections for that reason. For power chords, I actually have included a Metallica tune in the power chords section for my teenage years, so that was a lot of fun. You have Nirvana, It Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's a very, that was the first song that I learned, so it's in there. There's a few Tom Petty tunes. There's an Elton John tune in there as well. So a lot of stuff that I like. And I'm trying to think. Sultans of Swing, I think, is in the end. The last chapter is a book. It's a chapter on the B flat major on the fifth string that uses the A shape, and Sultans of Swing is included in that. So there's a pretty broad spectrum of different popular tunes.
Yeah, and I think obviously sounds like a really refreshing method where we're getting, I get to learn these contemporary songs, Beatles, Metallica, Sultans of Swing. So I think, it definitely sounds like it's catered to a broader selection of guitar players. It's not strictly a classical guitar book.
No, not at all. Not at all. And I mean, I wrote it because I didn't see anything else like it on the market. And I felt a sort of, calling and responsibility to do it.
Yeah. Now, I was going to ask you about your second book, because when I was doing the research for this podcast, I saw that you had another book out. And as you let me know just before we went live, that it's actually a rebranding of the original book. So the word market come up there. You identified a gap, and you had a product, or maybe you wrote the first one initially. But what sort of prompted you to rebrand it, rewrite it, come at it from a new angle?
It's a great question. And so the reason is specifically or strictly for publishing and marketing reasons. So one of the benefits of Amazon KDP is it's very easy to release material. It's also very easy to, just to quickly acclimate to. And so I pretty quickly released my first book, but I wasn't too aware of, search engine optimization, keywords, and how that all ties into the title and the subtitle of the work. I mean, I think normally what I would have done, and probably what I would normally advise, is just use your first book as a learning experience and then go on to writing books 2 and 3 and so on. But in this situation, Guitar Chords and Context is going to be it'll probably be the book that appeals to the broadest audience. Since I'm a classical guitarist, I'm dedicated to teaching classical guitar. Anything else I write moving forward is going to be dedicated to classical guitar. And so I would miss out on the wider market if I didn't do it. And so I educated myself a little bit on keywords and keyword research, and then also retitled it so that the title and subtitle were keyword rich. A lot of, particularly publishing on Amazon, is predicated on search results. And so I wanted to get this out to the widest audience possible. And so that's why I rebranded it.
Awesome. And very smart in terms of business and reaching a new audience is to be aware of all those things. And I like the idea how you say, just get out a book and then try and improve on second and third. But it also goes to show that there's nothing wrong in this day and age of rebranding it, reproducing something and having another run at it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think in my situation, it was the wisest thing to do. Now I think if someone was in a broad, someone's main niche was a broader niche, maybe just cranking out books 2 and 3 would have been the way to go.
And is there a potential book 2 and 3 within the chord? I know you just said specifically that, you are going to go back to focusing on classical, but is there the potential to have a book 2 and 3 or to extend the same method to additional songs, things like that for you?
It's a great question. Not at the moment. I think if there was, if this was well received, widely well received, and people really wanted a book 2, or they felt like there was a specific need for book 2, and I somehow felt like I was the person to write that book, then I would. But really, actually, for myself, what I do is I'll use, what is it? I think it's a guitar, or was it Jazz and Popular Chords by Arnie Burley? I think it's something along that. It's an Arnie Burley book on jazz and popular guitar chords. And so I use that as the follow-up. Like if my student finishes through my methodology, then I'll go to his. And his is more traditional in the sense that he's introducing 3-finger, 4-finger chords more quickly. But I think it's good for developing jazz chords and learning how to use jazz chords, and certainly helps develop players being able to identify chord function and use chord function. I think it's a great follow-up to my book.
Awesome. I'll have to write that one down and check that one out for myself. What advice do you have for the listeners who may be wanting to release a book? How does someone get a book on Amazon? Why should they get a book on Amazon? Would you recommend the traditional approach, or is it just way better to go straight to the Kindle KDP?
It's a good question. It's a great question. So there's a lot of things to consider. With traditional publishing, generally what's going to happen is you'll get, you're basically taking a certain amount of risk, in the sense that, you're writing this book, a publisher is, will give you an advance, which is pretty much an advance payment on royalties and that sort of thing. And then they'll pretty much collect until the advance is paid, and then you'll receive any royalties after that. I think it's good if you're, it's good for a number of reasons. They have a wider distribution, so you have that. But I think traditional publishing, I don't think it's growing. You have with a lot of electronics and things like that, I don't see that as growing industry. But if you're an author that has a major name, it might be the right path. I think with independent publishing, anybody can do it, and more so than ever, KDP. If you have an idea, and that's what I did, I had an idea, and I was able to actually get it out there. And if for nothing else, it's something that my students were able to purchase and were able to use and get value out of. But with Amazon, they have a huge distribution. They were originally a bookseller, before they got into everything else. And so you have a huge distribution with Amazon. If you can navigate it, and if you can learn a little bit about how to promote the book, that it can be a great avenue. And it also doesn't have to be the end all be all. You can publish on Amazon, and then you can, maybe your second book, you can go a different route. And then what's great about it is, it's been great for me about it, is I've learned a lot about the publishing field through KDP, through being able to publish a book so quickly. And there's also little intricacies that they really just help you out with. First of all, the logistics are very easy. You just upload everything, and then you click a button, and boom, you're an author. And the other thing is logistics, like an ISBN number. They'll give you an ISBN number, free ISBN number. Whereas normally, if you were publishing outside of Amazon, you would have to purchase that. And for a new author, that would just be like another hurdle. Like, oh my gosh, how do I navigate this? But they really streamline it and make it very easy for especially for new authors.
That's awesome. And yeah, Amazon is now the biggest marketplace in the world. It's almost, as what you said, like the traditional publishing companies could probably get you to a broader audience, but now you still get your books off of Amazon, which are printed by the actual company. So you end up on, Amazon either way. But the whole fact that you can, in 3 clicks, become an author, provided you've got something written and ready to go, and bypass the whole need to have a publishing company, which is exactly the same as having a record label. There's definitely advantages to being on a record label or a publishing company. But as you mentioned before, it's the advance that often gets people. The simple fact that, to get on one of these places, you need to be good. And obviously you don't want to put crap products out there or not have quality stuff. But the fact that you can go straight to the market and get active feedback by the market, as opposed to be one of hundreds, if not thousands of people putting their stuff into the publisher only to be saying, which is still could be great stuff, but say no just because it's not what they're looking for, and then miss out. And then the whole world misses out on the awesome stuff that you've got. So yeah, I think it's a very
sure. And another thing I forgot to mention that's, kind of ties into this is that Amazon, for their paperback, have print on demand service. So pretty much, hey, somebody orders a copy of your book, Amazon prints out a copy of the book and sends it, to the person. Whereas if you go the traditional route, sometimes you have to print out many copies of your book. And I hear, there's like classic horror stories of like somebody printed out like 1,000 copies of their book and they never sold them. And, now they just have extra copies lying around. And you don't have that problem at all with Amazon. It's just, because they're just printing them on demand.
That's it. And you don't have a $10,000 to $100,000 advance from your publishing company, which you need to pay back before you see a single cent for your hard work. You just print the ones you need on demand, that's a little insight, guys. All the Guitar Ninjas books, which I publish, are set up so that only the licensees can actually access them and purchase them. But of course, they're all set up through Amazon. And what we do when someone has an order for their school, they obviously send an order through to me. I log on to the back end of the Amazon thing, place in an order, and that just ships the books to them directly. It's so convenient. So if someone from the UK purchases one of my books or a collection of books, we just press a button, pay Amazon some money, and it ships it they print it in the factory closest to them and ship it, within 1 or 2 business days. So if anything, it is way more convenient than having to go to a traditional publishing route or even a bookstore. Like you literally, when are you ever going to get 100 of the same book from a bookstore? Never. You'd have to go to 5 different stores or 20 different stores. The fact that we can just press a button and have it delivered straight to our clients and our licensees' house within a couple of business days is amazing. And it's just taking away that barrier to entry. And in terms of being a publisher, you can now go straight to the marketplace. You have the convenience of Amazon's distribution chain already set up, ready to go. And the fact that you can order 1 book at a time, or you can order 1,000 books at a time, and you pay essentially no more additional fees, or you don't have to store things. It's just Amazon is winning. And there's a reason why, they're the biggest company, or close to the biggest company in the world right now, is the fact that they're setting up this distribution chain. They're making it great for consumers and producers. And as we see with, Francesco, he's been able to get his book and put that one out. And a little shameless plug here. Go check it out, guys, on Amazon right now as you're listening to this. And if you had a preferred method, do you make more money from the ebook or the physical book, or does it not matter at this point?
It's a great question. So, when I initially published it, I had no intention to publish an ebook, but Amazon, there's different strategies with it. Amazon really pushes the ebooks. They give you a larger percentage of the ebooks. And you could do free promotion, different promotional offers of the ebook. There's different strategies. So initially, the thought was I could use an ebook to promote the physical book. And who's going to want to just use an ebook? So they'll get the ebook, they'll like it, and then they'll want to purchase the physical copy. But now I think, with tablets and things like that, I think that people would just be content to purchase the ebook. And so another thing is it's a lower price point. And so something that I value as an author, and I value it as a customer, is being able to get a deal or being able to get something at a lower price point. And I think the ebook provides that for customers who are looking for, maybe something that's under $10. Amazon will reward you if you price your book between $2.99 and $9.99. So So there's an incentive to have it at this lower price point. So it really, it kind of depends on the book, it depends on the content, and it depends on a lot of things. But I think ebooks are getting more popular in general.
Yeah, as more and more of the world goes digital, it's a direction that you probably want to head in, or at least consider that, why not reach a broader audience just by offering a PDF version of something, or something that people access, as you said, on their tablets or their computers or their devices. My last question on the topic of ebooks and Amazon, is this something like you just put it out there and hope that it's going to take off, or if people buy it, they buy it and you're not too concerned, or are you going to be actively pushing it, promoting it, and trying to make money out of this book?
Me specifically, or just in general?
Oh, you specifically. So, I would be asking for you specifically, because there are going to be people who listen to this and go, I 100% want to get an ebook out there and make money off it. And other people would be like, oh, well, I've got some stuff written, but if I can make some extra stuff on the side just by having it there and people are going to find it. Obviously, two different perspectives there, but in your personal experience, what's the drive behind this and putting it out in the market?
So first and foremost, I have something that I feel like is valuable for, a community of, guitar learners. I otherwise wouldn't have been an author and wouldn't have published anything if I didn't have anything to say. But then if you're going to publish on Amazon, you really do have to promote it, because if you take the more passive approach, no one will find your book, just because there's so much content. I mean, just the point that we had mentioned before, that there's, that you have, it's so easy to get on Amazon KDP. As a consequence, you have a ton of authors publishing on KDP. You have a lot of competition. And in order for your book to be seen, you do need to be actively promoting it. I have done things like just sell them to my students and that sort of thing, which you can do that. But I also, I don't think it would pay off. In my experience, it hasn't. I think you really have to promote the book so it can be discovered on Amazon search engines.
Yeah. Some great perspective there. Now, we've spoken a lot about books. You've obviously got yours out now and another one potentially coming out early 2023. What are some books that you've read, either from a guitar player's perspective or business or mentorship, that you would recommend our listeners go and check out and go and read?
That's a really good question. So first, The Art and Technique of Practice, I think is a good one by Richard Provost. And I think it's great for, first of all, for yourself as a performer and as a player, but then also to be able to impart practice habits upon students, I think is just something certainly that I find I always have to do that when I'm working with new students. In terms of guitar technique book, I think Classic Guitar Technique, volumes 1 through 3 by Richard Provost. Also, it's a great book which articulates how to play arpeggios in a very specific way. Volume 2, volume 1 is a scale method, and it describes the mechanics of the right hand, particularly, but both hands in detail that I haven't seen anywhere else. And then a very popular book by Scott Tennant is Pumping Nylon.
So I can't help but laugh. It's just a great pun. So it's pumping nylon instead of pumping iron.
It's a really good title. It's a really good title.
A great title.
Yeah. And now I think in 2016 they created a new edition, and it's like there's different volumes, and like all the volumes are together. I think there's 4 of them total. And so there's a repertoire that accompanies the technique, but it's another great technique book. A lot of great exercises. It covers a lot of material in that book. So those are a few that I can think of.
Awesome. So guys, we'll include the links to those books in the summary of this, because that sounded great. I'm definitely checking out that Pumping Nylon. I'm already sold on that. Now, my last question before we wrap it up here, if you could impart one final piece of wisdom upon guitar players in their journey, or more specifically, music teachers, guitar teachers listening to this podcast, what would that be?
I would say invest in your education. I think that you would be doing yourself a great service, and you would be doing your students a great service if you're continuing your education. And a few things I could recommend are, music degrees in general, particularly for guitar. For classical guitar, if you're looking for a good, a good program with strong performance program, as well as good pedagogy sequence, University of Hartford and University of Southern California are two schools I would recommend. That would be, and if that's in the cards, that would be a great thing to do. But you don't have to do that. Another thing is getting Suzuki training. That's a great way outside of the university system to receive pedagogy training. I still get to receive Suzuki training. I get certified in an additional book every year. I find it valuable for my own teaching. It informs my Suzuki teaching, but also informs my non-Suzuki teaching as well. And that's very accessible. And their trainings are held all over the world, and they're held online. And then another way is just to invest in your own playing by receiving lessons. And basically anybody that has a certain knowledge in regards to playing that you want or that you're seeking, take a few lessons with that person. And if you think it's worthwhile, take more lessons with that person. So that would be my recommendation.
Some really, really solid advice, and we can't understate the importance of continuous ongoing education, investment in yourself. The best investment you can make is an investment in yourself. And, with the crazy high inflation we've got right now, with the whole stock market crashing, Bitcoin tanking, all these kind of things, like you get a negative return on your money, you lose money, but every dollar you invest in yourself is going to pay back tenfold. So go out and find a great teacher to help you get to that next level in your playing. Subscribe to the Top Music program to learn how to run a better business or to develop your guitar teaching skills. Go and buy Francesco's book. The fact that how much is your book on Amazon at the moment? Your ebook?
The ebook is $6.99.
So for $7, you can learn a whole new system, get a whole new perspective on teaching guitar and helping your students. And a $7 investment in that, I absolutely guarantee you, will boost the long term of your retention and translate to thousands, if not $10,000s of dollars worth of return value for you. From someone who went through my own journey of using these traditional methods, and you've heard me say, any of my listeners, that this guitar, the most popular guitar method book we have here in Australia, is total garbage. It's total junk, and it was part of the reason why so many of the students at the music school were quitting, because it was boring, it was uninspiring, it was everything we talked about earlier in this interview. And then when I switched to going, hang on, what if I got my students learning one finger chords and doing simplified approaches? And when I did that, my retention shot through the roof, and I quickly became, the most popular teacher at that school. And that started that whole journey of me eventually writing Guitar Ninjas and now being the head of Top Music and having this podcast. If more teachers all around the world take these kind of methods and they apply them to their students and go, you know what? The traditional way says we do this, but what if there was a better way? Then you are going to transform the experience for your students. You're going to make a lot more money, but more important, you're going to be a lot more fulfilled because you've helped another person get over that hurdle of, this is hard, I feel like quitting, because you've got them engaged from the very start. You've got them having fun from the very start, and that's going to lead to long-term success for them. And of course, as a result for you as well. So guys, invest in yourself. That's some really solid advice by Francesco there. And $7 with his book, the fact that you can probably take away more than $7 of value from just listening to this interview, you owe him something. Go check it out. But Francesco, speaking of that, where can our listeners find you online and connect with you?
That's a great question. So they can find me on my website, francescobarone.com. It's all one word. I also provided a link for an email sign up. I interact with my audience mostly through my various email lists, and I have 3 of them. So the first one is my performance list. And in this sign up, you can sign up for whichever you prefer. So the first is my performance list. I send out general newsletters about 4 times a year, and I update the people on the list when I'm performing and where. The second one is my studio list, and I have promotions regarding teaching and my lessons. And then I also have updates on my studio, get access to studio performances and things like that. And then the third newsletter is my publication newsletter. And so if there's any information about book promotions, certainly the release of my new book will be communicated first on that publication newsletter. And so there's they're the three. So any of those the three, that would be a great way to stay in touch. And then also by email, if you have any questions, my email is barone.guitar@gmail.com. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to help.
That's totally awesome. So guys, you know where to find him. Francesco, thank you so much for coming on the Top Music Guitar Teaching Podcast and sharing your wealth of information. Guys, the book will have been out for about a month by the time that you guys are listening to this, so make sure you check it out. Let's see if we can get this to the top of the Amazon list, make it a bestseller for him. And of course, as he said, invest in yourself. So as 2023 is coming up, make it your year. Invest in a coaching program, invest in guitar lessons with a new teacher, keep on reading some awesome books to keep you inspired and find new ideas. And we'll look forward to big 2023. Francesco, thanks for coming on. And we'll see you guys, our listeners, in the next podcast. Thank you. If you enjoy this show and want to hear more of our work, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, including a free ebook on how to find more guitar students, visit us at www.topmusic.co/guitar or check out the show notes. And lastly, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.